All right, well, thank you, comrades. I enjoyed the discussion earlier on this morning. I hope the people online did as well. There's a small number of us gathered in Manchester. We're all from Manchester. And obviously getting to these meetings and watching these meetings and organising these meetings is quite difficult. So we should see this, in my opinion, as a positive start. We've got another discussion in a moment with Ed introducing the answer, hopefully, to Kat's question, which is how do we get from here to there? And I just want to come back on some of the points that were raised in the discussion. It's inevitable in a discussion, even where there's only a few contributors or participants, that it's not possible to deal with all of the issues that have been raised. Each one sentence could take up a whole meeting in terms of being discussed fully, and even that wouldn't exhaust everything that could be said about it. So I just want to concentrate on perhaps a few main points and one point perhaps that I didn't develop. First of all, I'd like to say this in terms of other Marxists, people who are in other organisations. Anybody who has withstood the onslaught on the working class and the barrage on Marxism and the attack and the retreat that socialism generally has had in society, who has stayed the course, is to be congratulated. And I think that's really important, because I consider, even though I have disagreements with people in other groups, some significant, some less so, I've got immense admiration and praise for the fact that they have stayed the course and they've tried to build their organisation. My point is that the way that that has been done, or is being done, is not necessarily, well, I don't think it is the best way. And I think that there needs to be a thorough reassessment amongst the whole of the Marxist left about how we go about making our ideas relevant. I don't think our role is to make social democratic ideas relevant. I think our role is to make communist, socialist, changing society fundamentally, those ideas, to make those relevant, to make them popular, to make them the common sense of the working class. And in my opinion, the ideas of Marxism are common sense, but they're not necessarily ideas that every worker will automatically draw from their own experience. And I think that this is something that we need to understand, that the reason that we need a party is because we need to make sure that the ideas that are necessary to change society are presented in the class and become part of the class. I think some of the Marxists in the Marxist movement think that this will be automatically achieved. I don't agree with that. I think some people can come to the conclusions, but they'll be few and far between. But the lived experience in terms of being exploited as a worker, or living in a family where you can't afford the rent, and all of the other problems of working class existence, lead workers to understand, if not coherently but intuitively, to understand the nature of exploitation. The role of the party is to try to draw all of those experiences together and present it back in a way that people could say, yes, I agree with that, I identify with that, and I think that what they're saying is the way forward. If it was automatic that workers drew the right conclusions through their struggle, then you can't explain why people keep voting for Labour. You can't explain why working class people voted en masse for Trump in America. You can't explain why workers may be seduced by racism or anti-immigration xenophobia. You can't explain that if you're saying that simply by being a member of the working class you draw socialist conclusions. Those two ideas are incompatible. So what is it that's missing? What's missing is, in my opinion, a party with significant presence and purchase in the class that can appear as something significant, that is confident, that is bold, that is audacious, and does not hide its ideas. In the attempts to build an alternative over the last 20 or 30 years, there have been Marxists who have, in my opinion, not had the confidence in the ideas that they say they have in putting them forward. And they have hidden them or subordinated them to social democratic ideas. And if you look at any of the different attempts, whether it's Socialist Labour Party, who say that was dominated by the Stalinism of Stalin, plus social democratic politics. You could look at Socialist Alliance, which Chris mentioned, and I was in the Socialist Alliance. I was actually the chair of it at one stage. But there was a fundamental problem, that the parties who were revolutionary, like the SP, Socialist Party, or the SWP, did not want to turn the Socialist Alliance into a party. They wanted to use it as a recruitment pool for their party. And in fact, when the Socialist Alliance Conference voted for one person, one vote membership, the Socialist Party walked out because they knew that they were going to be outvoted by the SWP. The SWP, on the other hand, when it came to 9/11 and the launching of Stop the War, instead of doing it through the Socialist Alliance, they did it in their own name and made sure that the Socialist Alliance wasn't a participant in it. So they basically put their own sectarian party building project beyond that of the Socialist Alliance. The perhaps overarching fundamental problem, in my opinion, of the Socialist Alliance was that the programme that we put forward was a reformist social democratic programme. If you look at People Before Profit, it was a sort of Benite type programme. That was the big problem. Now, it did get some significant votes. For example, I think in St Helens, we got a very, very good vote where, was it Woodward, was so wealthy as Butler had a butler, I think was the phrase. But what it did, it showed the potential. But in my opinion, a much more serious, significant approach would be for those revolutionary organisations who managed to collaborate or cohabit in the Socialist Alliance, do so on a revolutionary fundamental change programme, and not subordinate their programme to a social democratic one. It does not mean turning our backs on the social democratic thinkers in the labour movement. It means we say, look, this is what we agree. At the moment, you don't agree with us. Let's carry on talking, but we're going to build our party. You build that. In struggle, we'll be side by side, but we'll be making the point that this struggle needs to be linked to the overarching objective of changing society so that we don't have to keep coming on marches like this. Now, that's a discussion, and sometimes you persuade people through discussion. More often than not, it depends upon experience. You draw conclusions from experience, but as I said a few moments ago, you don't automatically. So it's the experience and the explanation, the coming together, participating in the struggle together, and having somebody say something to you that everything falls into place. It's not enough to fight for reforms. Reforms are immensely important. And we should fight for every reform, and we should organise against every attempt to take reforms away. And Ed and others raised issues about legislation that has been won that the capitalists at the time make concessions, and that we do need to go into those sorts of arguments in a lot more detail and look at the nuance. And in a half-hour introduction, I wasn't able to go into that sort of nuance, but I agree that we do. And we need to be careful how we pose things. And maybe I was a bit too broad brushed. That's something we can come back to. But the struggle, in discussions on the climate change, is it possible for capitalism to regulate and limit carbon emissions? which capitalists are going to do that against their own interests? Now, some might go into renewables and they'll say, oh yeah, we're all in favour of it. The rest won't. Look at what Trump's going to be doing on fossil fuel. It's going to be let rip. Profit dominates. The profit system dominates. The profit motive dominates. Now, of course, there will be differences within the capitalist class about how they pursue the best way to get the profit, and sometimes they'll have to make concessions, and there'll be splits in the ruling class, which is why you get in America two main parties that both represent the class of the billionaire oligarch owners of capital. In some other countries, there's more than two parties of capitalism. Labour, in my opinion, is a party of capital. You look at what Starmer's doing, it's clear. One of the things that I think is noticeable is that many of the people that supported Corbyn think that things went wrong with the Labour Party when Corbyn lost, and that when Starmer won. I think probably a shared view here, the Labour Party has never, certainly this is my opinion, has never since its inception been a socialist party. It never has been, and it never will become a socialist party. Now that doesn't mean that it might not have been at one time or another a sensible, I'm not putting an argument, I'm just saying as a tactical question, it might have been sensible at one time or another for people with Marxist ideas to work in it to try and win people to Marxism. That's certainly why I joined under Corbyn. I think we have to say that we signally failed in respect of that. But the Labour Party is not and was not ever a socialist party. So we come back to the question of the party and go on to some of the questions that I just wanted to take up briefly. I agreed with, Chris wasn't here when Ed, I think, answered his points on Ukraine. I just want, this is my take on it. Just because a section of the working class has a particular view does not mean that it's correct. And sometimes, as I've just explained in terms of other things, a working class on a national scale or even on a local level can draw conclusions which are actually antipathetic without them knowing it to their own well-being and their own emancipation. And to get behind the Ukrainian state, in my opinion, is incorrect. We have to find a way, I think, of speaking to Ukrainian workers, trade union members, and arguing it out about the nature of that war, that battle, which in my opinion is a war between rival capitalist states, capitalist groups, imperialist groups, I would go as far to say, including Russia. We should not take either side in that. That's perhaps a discussion that we can develop on another occasion. If we were to take the view that because a group of workers says something and therefore we need to follow it, what do we do on the question of racism or immigration controls or import controls? We have to argue, even if we're in a minority, why these ideas seem to be correct and seem to be in their interest, but they're not. So, for example, social democracy, Benism, Corbynism, would put forward this idea, I think Ed raised this idea of developing the British economy. We've got to build the British economy, it's like recreate the steel industry, recreate, sort of wanting to roll back globalization. It's impossible. You cannot roll back globalization. What we need to do is to socialize globalization, turn it into an international communist existence. Capitalism comes up against the national state, the barriers of the national state. It can't resolve its own contradictions. And the only way to resolve those contradictions is to actually work or move towards a society in which countries and rivalries on a national basis no longer exist. If you take Trump, you listen to his program, tariffs against everybody else, massive tariffs against China, clearly preparing for increased conflict with China. Appeal to the working class and to industrial workers, particularly on the basis of protecting American industry. Bernie Sanders in 2016, and probably still now, had exactly the same program. Basically, protect American jobs. So the idea is we protect our jobs, but in doing that, you're destroying jobs elsewhere. You're creating competition between different groups of workers across the globe. And in fact, you're probably ensuring that there'll be some sort of trade war, which will deteriorate and possibly escalate into more than that. So we have to argue patiently, sometimes as a minority, but why certain policies and programs are not in the interests of the working class. I didn't have an opportunity to talk about the state and the social democratic attitude towards the state. Obviously, in a discussion or a talk that lasts even for 30 minutes, you can't cover everything. When you put something on the website or you write something on Facebook, you can't write a book every time you comment, so some things get left out. But social democracy is defined in one way by seeing the state, the existing state, completely differently and wrongly, but differently from the way that Marxists see it. Social democrats and liberals, because in a sense social democracy is a form of liberalism, but they see the state as some sort of impartial entity that sits above society and sort of, it takes neither side, and you can look to the state to fill the gaps, and you can look to the state to do this, that, or the other. They do not understand that the state actually, in the last analysis, represents the capitalist class. It is there to protect the capitalist class and its profit system. And behind the idea of the state are the bodies of the police, the army, the prisons, the courts. We should not be looking to strengthen that state. We should not be looking to put more power into that state, because it will be used against us and the working class. We see that significantly on the question of Gaza, where the protests are being clamped down on, free speech is being clamped down on, academics are being sacked, students are being expelled from colleges, workers are being arrested on demonstrations for the most ludicrous things. That is the capitalist state using its power to clamp down on free speech, clamp down on the right to protest, clamp down on the right to organize in order to defend their system, to give them freer rein to conduct their world, to organize their wars without interference. And so we're looking at a society in which, for a short period of time, this is another discussion, a period of workers' rule, working class coming to rule in society, defeating the capitalist class. In my opinion, again, following Marx and Engels, there would be a period in which the working class would organize itself to protect what it's just won. But that state would be completely different from the existing state. Why? Well, first of all, I'm predicating this on the basis that the workers in power would expropriate the capitalist class, take over the means of production. But the state of the working class in power would be, for the first ever time, the majority of humanity in charge of a state. The minority would be the ex-owners of capital who no longer are in power. And the need to repress them would be very quickly, in my opinion, insignificant. I don't want to be quoted or yeah, I think you can debate that. But in fact, I believe that the power of, if the working class internationally comes to power, it is so powerful that if it comes to power, it means that an immense mass of humanity has participated in that successful transformation of society, in that takeover of power. And the ability of the ruling class would be lesser as a result of doing. But put that to one side. We see a society in which the need for a repressive state disappears. To use Engels' term, it withers away. It withers away. So at the end, we're left with a stateless society, a classless society, a society without borders, a society of abundance, in my opinion, and a society in which production is planned, where everybody is looked after, everybody gets what they need. And that's the sort of society that I think is a vision for most working class people. And we need to inspire people. We cannot build a party on the basis of we're against this or we're against that. We have to give a vision of the sort of society that we want to create. Because people want to know, is another form of society possible? Is it worth me devoting my life, fighting, struggling for this new form of society? Well, it is, but it's hard work, and this is just a small step towards that. I hope that in Manchester, at least, and elsewhere, we'll be able to bring comrades from the different organisations and from new organisations and people that don't know about these sorts of discussions together to discuss how better we can take this process forward. Thank you.